Bob. Bob had bitch tits.
Hello YouTube, this is DVD Review Studios here, and today I shall be doing a different kind of collection video in relation to the career of one of my all-time favourite actors. That being Edward Norton, somebody that I have followed for a very long time, and who I find to be a fantastic actor, very talented, a very creative individual, especially from a directorial standpoint, and somebody that I have found to be very versatile with the titles that he has done. And so in this video we shall be looking through the films that I have from his filmography in the collection. I have 12 films individually to go through, and in total, looking at his IMDb page, he has approximately 50 acting credits in total, covering television, movies, and uncredited roles as well, which I do have a couple of his films that he was technically uncredited for, such as Ricky Gervais's movie The Invention of Lying.
I have an expensive cocaine habit.
Which I've purposefully not included since they're more or less sort of cameo roles, they're not a proper prominent feature of Edward Norton's sort of acting capabilities, so I've disregarded films like that. But as we go through this video, we shall be looking at these titles in particular in chronological order, beginning with his acting debut in Primal Fear. And we shall be looking through his career, what I like about him as an actor, and the titles that he has brought to my attention. So without further ado, let us begin with Primal Fear. First up we have Primal Fear from 1996, which is Norton's acting breakthrough and debut on screen for a film based on the novel by William Deal, playing young altar boy Aaron Stampler, who is accused of basically murdering a priest, which almost appears as a kind of wrong place, wrong time situation that seemingly seals his fate as guilty. And acting alongside Richard Gere playing the lawyer Martin, Martin stands to defend Aaron in an impossible case where we are met with one hell of a twist. And a trope of Norton's acting career appears to be a dual personality, which is present in this film, Fight Club, and The Incredible Hulk as well as an example. And one of my favourite scenes in this film in particular is the very harsh interrogation moment where Martin breaks Aaron, revealing an alter ego of Roy, a very confident bully who confesses to actually committing the murder and supposedly sticks up for Aaron, but in reality, the person that is Aaron, that is Roy, is playing a character on both angles to avoid a prison sentence with both manipulation as well as violence. I really enjoyed what Norton brought to this role, a very intriguing and complex character, and the additions that Norton brought to the role, such as the stutter for Aaron in particular to kind of differentiate the split personality.
Aaron couldn't kick his own ass. I mean, you seen him with the duh.
A very complicated film which does appear to be faithful to the original source material, and I believe in 1997 Norton actually won an award for this film, which is absolutely of no surprise. His role was absolutely incredible. Next up we have American History X from 1998, which is one of Norton's strongest performances in my opinion, portraying the character of Derek Vineyard, a white supremacist. And going off the brutal opening scene where the character kills two black men for attempting to steal his vehicle, he is sentenced to prison, making a very long-lasting impression on his younger brother Danny, played phenomenally by Edward Furlong. And the twist with this film was a redemption story where Derek learns to make amends for his actions, and once out of prison makes it his mission to ensure that his younger brother does not follow the same brutal path. And looking at what Norton brings to this film, this is where his involvement with the movie highlights an interesting quirk to his career, that being interference. Norton has supposedly been known to be very difficult to work with, where in this film in particular he made many changes to the script, and this drove director Tony Kaye to want to abandon the project, causing various editing conflicts, which Norton, with apparently taking control of the post-production, caused even more interference but supposedly made the film much better, which I guess is debatable and perhaps something that we will never really know, but Tony Kaye still considers this film to be essentially incomplete, which is a really interesting way to view it, but certainly a very powerful performance, a very dark ending in particular, something I will not spoil in this video because I would highly recommend you go ahead and check out this film if you haven't before, but certainly a film that is not for the sensitive, I will say that very bluntly. But definitely check out American History X, and certainly one of Norton's best performances. Juxtaposing the previous film, we now have a fun buddy movie with Rounders from 1998, where between Matt Damon and Ed Norton, this is basically a gambling film with a lot of very funny sort of provocative moments. And this time Norton is playing a very seedy cheat of a character, a gambler appropriately named Worm. And with Damon's character of Mike trying to use his poker talents to win money to pay off loan sharks, Worm gets out of prison and is invited into the world of high-stakes card games, where he's more interested in looking like he's a straight player, giving himself a confidence boost, where in reality he's trying to basically stay ahead of the curve, cheat his way to the top, and I really enjoyed that liminality he retained, staying between the lines where we as spectators are basically uncertain of what his intentions really are. And the plot, although basic, I really enjoyed it for what it was and what he brought to the table. It's a film that I've only seen the once, but it's certainly something I will likely revisit again later on down the line, and was overall a very fun and entertaining movie. Next up, we have one of my all-time favourite movie adaptations of a book that I cannot recommend highly enough. That, of course, being Fight Club, written by Chuck Palahniuk. This is something, as far as the story goes, that I have used both for the book and the movie countless times towards varying essays and overall towards my final bachelor's degree, and learning this story inside and out has definitely allowed me to appreciate Fight Club a lot more than what I originally did. And the themes that it represents, the anti-consumerist narrative, society emasculating what it means to be a modernized man, and the themes of strength and identity of an inner person, it's really well represented with what David Fincher brings to the table as the director, who did a wonderful job adapting this story, and I really appreciated what he added to the film in terms of the post-production. The editing quirks in particular make this a very rewatchable movie once you know the twist. And the CGI shots at the beginning really are some of my favourite moments, which speak volume for establishing the movie's events. Which brings us to Edward Norton portraying the unnamed narrator character, a character that is so bland he's essentially relatable to any kind of sort of white-collar worker, and I really appreciate that, and the dimension that he as a person adds to the character of the narrator, with varying moments of internal monologuing, with thoughts and opinions that we as people would never really say out loud. And one thing that is definitely interesting about what Norton brings to the character is how throughout the sequences where he is attempting to experience empathetic feelings, the scenes where he is attending cancer support groups, a place that he doesn't belong, it's a form of therapy where we see his character go through the motions of trying to cope with a lack of sleep, essentially, trying to experience feelings, trying to cry again. And the moment where he's crying into the character that Meatloaf portrays, Bob, crying into his chest, it's one of the most bizarre but really humble experiences that the character shows throughout the entire film. I also found this film to be extremely quotable. I did a video quite a while ago looking at some of my favourite quotes from the movie, even on the slipcover for the Blu-ray release. "You are not special. You are not a beautiful and unique snowflake. You're the same decaying organic matter as everyone else." Some quotes that are absolutely unforgettable from the way that they are delivered. And overall, that just adds to the monotony of this film with its messages of empowering the modern man, and something that I think is definitely something that is very funny nowadays, especially in the postmodern era, looking at sort of toxic masculinity as a theme that you could perhaps tag onto this movie. But speaking of which, we have, of course, Tyler Durden as a character, a very estranged, go-getting man that the narrator character essentially becomes obsessed with, inspired by him, and then they together start a revolution against society. And the big twist, of course, for the film, if you haven't seen it, I'd say definitely come off this video, or at least skip to the next film, I suppose. But the twist that they are the same person, it's definitely an interesting way that theme is delivered through the film very subtly throughout, which, like I mentioned before, makes this very rewatchable. And then when you're punched in the face with that twist, he was Tyler Durden all along. Norton added a lot of depth to this story with the role, which really defined many tropes that I really appreciate about him as an actor. And many of those tropes have kind of carried on throughout his career, and this was definitely something that molded him in the late 90s. Next up, we have Norton's directorial debut with Keeping the Faith from the year 2000, which was unexpectedly a romantic comedy, which stars Norton as Father Brian Finn, alongside Ben Stiller as Rabbi Jake Schramm, a literal priest and a rabbi joke forming a love triangle with their mutual childhood friend Anna, played by Jenna Elfman. And I went into this film completely blind. From the front cover, you wouldn't really interpret this as anything in relation to maybe like a religious theme. But I went into this completely blind, and the reveal at the beginning where Norton's character is sat at the bar and he's discussing his sort of life story with the barman, and he rips some of his outer clothing off, showing a priest's collar. I scream laughed at that moment. It was honestly some of the most unexpected kind of exposition for this movie, and the story was very basic, but I found a lot of the one-liners and the awkward situation comedy to be some of the funniest sort of written comedy throughout, and both men attempting to find romance, something that has been kind of previously denied to them, since it's something that they haven't been able to fully explore due to their faith. It opens up a lot of strange opportunities, showing a lot of versatility between both main actors, and Norton in particular, delivering as a director and delivering humour is something that is definitely something I wish I'd seen more from him. Not that he's an unfunny man, but certainly it's something that I kind of wish he'd done more of in terms of comedies rather than drama roles. Based on the novel written by Thomas Harris, we have Red Dragon, which completes the Hannibal Lecter trilogy starring Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter throughout all three films for the movie adaptations. And this time we have Norton playing FBI profiler Will Graham, who is constantly consulting Hannibal Lecter in the hopes of piecing together evidence left by a serial killer referred to as the Tooth Fairy, later named the Red Dragon after the painting by William Blake. And originally, this was actually my favourite of the Hopkins trilogy. It's a phenomenal film, regardless. And the story, as far as the actual book is concerned, it's definitely my favourite from the Hannibal Lecter trilogy, with phenomenal writing by Thomas Harris. But over time, I've come to appreciate Silence of the Lambs a lot more. And I think that stems from seeing Hugh Dancy playing the role of Will Graham in the TV adaptation. And in all honesty, I'm very conflicted now over Norton's incarnation of the character. I appreciate his sincere portrayal. Very serious, very monotone, which I like about him, is a very ordinary kind of FBI detective, which I interpreted very heavily when reading the book. However, Dancy added a lot of dimension to the character, and I do feel that is an unfair advantage considering he carried the character over for 3 seasons of the NBC television show. But the scenes throughout this film with Norton and Hopkins together, very intense, especially the opening in particular, and the final confrontation with Francis Dolarhyde, showing Norton's capabilities in an action thriller definitely did help, and I feel a lot of what he got from films such as Fight Club really heavily influenced how he was going to portray the character in this film. So overall, a very enjoyable movie for Red Dragon. Next up, we have a very provocative role for Norton as a convicted drug dealer, Monty Brogan, in Spike Lee's 25th Hour, which I felt to be kind of an open love letter to the city of New York. I've seen this film only once, but the story, and really the character, has stayed with me, and I felt it was a very odd take on a character's redemption arc. Monty is a very angry person. He takes out a lot of his aggression on society when really he's basically just angry with himself, looking at his own life choices, and this essentially gives him a deadline of 24 hours. It's his final day of freedom before facing an extended prison sentence, and throughout his last day, he does come to terms with his own actions. He reassesses his life choices. I love the tagline, "Can you change your whole life in a day?" And this is the experimentation that he kind of goes through as he reassesses what actions he has taken and what led him to being held by the DEA. And it's a very interesting theme throughout of entrapment experienced with the film, that you kind of root for a guilty character by the end, and it's a very interesting upside, especially with the family values that are sort of conflicted throughout, with a very hopeful ending and a phenomenal end narration by the father character. Certainly a film that I don't think is very rewatchable as such, but something that has stayed with me, and the character definitely did bring a lot of memorable moments from Ed Norton's portrayal, so definitely something I would give the one watch for sure. So that is 25th Hour. Next up, we have The Illusionist, directed by Neil Berger, a filmmaker that I do appreciate a lot for titles such as 2011's Limitless. And this movie was a very unique blend of fantasy and romance, where Norton is playing the character of Eisenheim the Magician, where the film is set in the late 1800s, based in the city of Vienna, and Eisenheim essentially uses illusion-based powers, magic, to wow audiences, where he bumps into his childhood love interest Sophie, played by Jessica Biel. And I love the conflict throughout. Sophie is expected to marry this very brutal crown prince character of Leopold, played by Rufus Sewell. And when performing in Vienna, Eisenheim uses Sophie in one of his magic acts, and he's threatened for doing so, as he wishes to basically make a move on her and try and win her heart, win her love, which creates a struggle for both characters, where between them both, they're very conflicted, and obviously with them having threats and basically with Sophie wanting to kind of get out of this relationship almost, where she's forced into this marriage. Both characters really do struggle throughout, and that power dynamic is very imaginative. It's a really great take on what could essentially be a very typical romance plot. And Norton really does steal the show with his very assertive kind of confidence. And especially when performing as a magician on stage, you really see that in his character for what he knows as transparency behind the curtain and what the audience does not know. And I really enjoyed the humble nature in his character, which could very easily turn into defiance, as he defies the wishes of other people and stands for really what he morally believes in, and that is true love and what he wants to have with Sophie. So definitely one of my favourite performances. I feel this film is very underrated. I'd say it's at least worth one watch, perhaps not something I will revisit anytime soon, but overall still very enjoyable. Next up, we have The Incredible Hulk, the second film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and a movie that surprisingly seems to have faded in relevancy. And I guess the main reason for this would be the recast of Bruce Banner from Edward Norton to Mark Ruffalo. And similarly to what I have kind of hinted and described throughout this video, Norton was very controlling apparently on set of this film, very difficult to work with, and demanded a better script, where insiders of the film described him as basically a wolf in a henhouse, of all things, which is a very interesting metaphor to describe him as a person. And I really don't blame him for acting the way that he did. The film isn't exactly thrilling, but it isn't terrible. I feel anything sort of franchise related is somewhat beneath what Norton brings to the table as an actor. He does wonders for standalone performances, encapsulating some sort of more memorable roles throughout, and rather than repeating the same character over a long duration over and over again. This film just seems to be really basic for him. Bruce Banner as a character is obviously coming to terms with a very rare condition, and he puts himself in exile to better understand his Hulk nature, and overall the film is just okay. It's something I've only seen a handful of times anyway, and it's got some imaginative moments throughout, some comedic moments too, but they're very scattered throughout, and it's something that, as a film, just isn't really that memorable, and especially now that Mark Ruffalo has taken ownership of the character, it really just makes this film less relevant, and it's a shame because Norton kind of thinking in a what-if scenario really would have added a lot, I feel, to the character of Bruce Banner split away from that of the Hulk. It would be really interesting to maybe see something like maybe a deepfake edit or something to see him merged into the Avengers movies and stuff, but obviously I'm probably asking for too much there, but definitely an interesting what-if scenario if Norton had carried on as the Incredible Hulk in the MCU. But that is the Hulk movie anyway. Not something that I'm overly fond of, but just an okay film, certainly not terrible. This is probably my least favourite film Edward Norton has starred in, a sequel that I found to be incredibly unnecessary and just did not care for in the slightest. And so, taking inspiration from the original 3 Bourne movies starring Matt Damon, we have The Bourne Legacy, which I just didn't care for. It's a very conflicting film, which we have Jeremy Renner playing a decent enough role, the character of Aaron Cross, an operative who goes on the run, with imminent risk of immediate exposure of the secret operations encouraged by the CIA, such as the stuff that happened with the franchise's protagonist, Jason Bourne. And Norton plays, throughout this film, a fairly meaningful side character in Colonel Eric Byer, a man attempting to retain control over a very awkward situation, but I found his role, I guess, somewhat interesting, but it could have been a lot more. Perhaps it would have been more interesting as either a main focus or possibly seeing him really as a more villainous kind of character from that point of view. But beyond that, I just wasn't really big on this film, and sadly even Edward Norton's character just couldn't salvage this movie for me. It's something that I've been kind of hit or miss as to whether or not to get rid of from the collection, since I was trying to keep all the Bourne movies together, but it's something that I'll probably let go of at some point in the near future. Next up we have Birdman, or in parenthesis, The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance. A very surreal film experience helmed for its interesting cinematography, manipulating the shot to look as though the whole film has been done in one single take. And it really does blur the lines between fiction and a stage performance, with Michael Keaton starring as washed-up actor Regan Thompson, who is trying to immerse himself with success from a very prominently failing Broadway production. And this is until Norton's character of Mike Shiner replaces one of the lead roles in the performance, who blows every performance out of the water. And the catch to this is that he is extremely difficult to work with, ironically, provoking Regan, fighting on stage, throwing literal tantrums. And I really enjoyed how bold his character was, especially how he recognized how he was essentially a dick to basically everybody, which was a fun scene highlighted between Norton's character and the character of Sam, played by Emma Stone. And it was interesting to see how he recognized that his true self was the person that he was on the stage. A very egotistical character that Norton handled perfectly, and he definitely was the highlight of this film. Overall, a very quirky movie to say the least, and he'd certainly brought a lot to the table for his performance. And finally, we have a much more recent film which was both written and directed by Edward Norton, and that is Motherless Brooklyn, a production that he has wanted to finish for many, many years, which was finally realised for the big screen in 2019. And this is overall a very different film, very different to the source material novel written by Jonathan Lethem, with Norton twisting the story into a noir detective story set in the 50s. And his character of Lionel is a detective attempting to solve the murder of his boss, Frank, played by Bruce Willis, who very briefly featured throughout the film. And the way Lionel operates as a detective is very different, with his character suffering from Tourette's syndrome. And it's a very peculiar film to see behind the veil of someone who is suffering from involuntary actions and speech difficulty. And I really do appreciate how the internal monologue trope brought into this film is something that lasts throughout and really does give an eye-opening account for the events going on from, obviously, the thoughts and perspectives of the character of Lionel. And one of my favourite things about Norton as an actor is those inner details that he adds to films that he is a part of. And so throughout the film, he retraces the footsteps of Frank to discover a series of corrupted events that he was involved in and essentially trying to reveal to the world. And although long as far as the duration of the film is concerned, I really enjoyed how Norton interpreted this story. Definitely an underappreciated spectacle in filmmaking, and I would strongly recommend this film. Perhaps not for everybody. It does have a lower rating on IMDb as an example than I was really expecting, but still, a great cast of characters and certainly a very interesting protagonist. So that's going to do it for my overview of movies in the collection that I have starring actor Edward Norton. I hope you did enjoy. If you did, be sure to leave me a like down below. Let me know in the comments, do you have any thoughts or opinions on these movies that I've shown in today's video? Or are there any films that you feel that I should check out starring Edward Norton? I certainly haven't covered them all. And by all means, if you're interested in more content like this, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.
Are you threatening me?